David, welcome to the show. It's nice to have you here.
Thank you so much.
So you've had an interesting history, and I want to get into the work that you're doing with Optios. But the work preceding that, right? Like how you get there is really the journey that is really fun to watch. I studied with a guy who got pulled into, I got a couple people I know in my history got pulled into DARPA work, and one went behind a shroud of secrecy, and another one kind of was teaching later. I studied with Barry Sturman, doing some neurofeedback work back in the day. And there's another guy in my college days who was playing with 3D printers back in the 90s, which sounded really revolutionary then. But then he was toying with this idea that they had figured out how to do the 3D fax, and they were talking about biological matter. And I was like, wow, that sounds like a teleporter. What are you talking about? Some company pulled him away and we never saw him again, right? I don't think he's dead. I just think he's in some lab creating Star Trek technology. So that's what DARPA in my mind is, right? Like this research organization that goes after some of the craziest, coolest, cutting edge stuff. And some of it goes to the military. We never see it. Some of it comes out like some of the stuff we're talking about today. So just give us a little background on how you got into all this.
To start, what you're saying about DARPA is right. They've been around for decades, and their mandate actually is to develop ideally dual use things, technology that benefits the military as well as commercial applications. And the origin story basically is there was an insight in the government that there's effectively a gap between what you do in a university and what you can do in a commercial enterprise. And so if you look at companies and their R&D functions, it doesn't make sense for a company to be investing in things that don't pay back for 15 years. And so you'll see a lot of R&D where, now things have changed a lot recently, but you'll see, at least historically, companies will do R&D if they think I can get a product that is generating revenues in 18 months. But back in the old days, it would never make sense for a company to invest in something where you think it's a 10-year payback. And so in order for the country to stay competitive, DARPA was founded with the theory that if you can fund research that looks like it's going to change the world, but maybe not until 10 years from now, you can develop an edge. And they've been spending billions of dollars every year on this. And it's one of the most successful things the government, I think, in the US has ever done. And they really were the foundation for things like the internet. They created something called the ARPANET. They created self-driving car technology, stealth technology, and the like. And again, the mandate really is competitiveness for the US, both within the government and commercially. But exactly as you say, there are some things that go behind a shroud of secrecy, and we never know about them, and we never hear about them for sure. And it's definitely designed to create technology that does feel science fiction-like.
And what's coming out very much quacks like that duck, right? There are
Oh,
some
yeah.
very interesting things coming out of DARPA.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I think just everything that's happening today is feeling more and more like science fiction. Arthur C. Clarke back in the day said, really great technology is characterized by a number of things, one of which is that it is indistinguishable from magic. And I think more and more technology is starting to, like you say, crack like that. I think every time I go into Claude and I ask it a question, I have some understanding of what it's doing, but still, I think I and many people just still say, oh, it's incredible. And it does feel a little bit supernatural. My background, I know you've already shared a little bit about it, but just the kind of the quick summary that's relevant here is after I left medical practice, I went into the business world, spent a bit of time as a venture capitalist, but my passion really is as a serial entrepreneur. And what I like to do is technology transfer. And so building on me being pretty good at business, pretty good at science, what I like to do is find interesting intellectual property and then build a bridge between that intellectual property and commercial application to take science that looks like it can make a difference and bring it into the world where it can actually impact people in a positive way. Optios is the fourth company I've done that with. It is by far and away the coolest thing I've ever done in my life. And in fact, more than ever before, what we are building, A, it does feel like science fiction, and B, there's at least the hope that it can really make a positive impact in the world as it flourishes. And so that's my background. Optios, I started it 7 years ago. The theory behind the company was leveraging neuroscience and AI to help optimize human performance and the human experience. It's grounded in work, as you say, that came out of DARPA starting 15 years ago. And I'll just pause and walk you through the original research, which is what you said you were interested in. So I guess 17 years ago, DARPA had a theory that you could potentially use neuroscience to make warfighters better. And so to test that theory, they did a very simple starting experiment. They just said, can I use neuroscience to distinguish the brain of an expert from a novice? The task they picked was marksmanship, shooting a gun, for pretty obvious reasons, right? So they scanned the brains of 100 of the best snipers in the military. They compared it to novices. And Pedram, what they discovered is that the expert brain knows how to get into a mental state that you call the zone. And by contrast, the novices didn't know how to get there. Now, obviously, they didn't discover that. What they discovered is that you can use neuroscience to actually measure it. You can find in the brain what we would call a neurophysiological correlate, where when the brain looks like this, the person's in a flow state, and when it doesn't, they're not. And then with that, they actually built, I think, arguably the first neurofeedback device. And of course, you know how these things work, but their version was just a sweatband, had some sensors in it. Very simply, it's just using those sensors to measure, is the person's brain in the zone or not? And then when they gave the feedback, they used a haptic motor because there were no other senses available. So for the marksman, when they're not in the zone, the thing is vibrating on the neck. And then as they get into the zone, the vibration goes away, right? And that's where the term neurofeedback came along. And they tested this many times, and the results were staggering. What they showed is by giving people information about their brain state, they could accelerate learning. And you saw novices with a month of training after maybe 2 or 3 hours in total, you saw rewiring in the brain. You actually could take a picture before and after. The brain learned to access that expert state. And with that, they moved 80% of the way up the learning curve toward expertise. So it saved time in training. And then they actually showed it made intermediates and experts better. And then they showed it worked in other areas besides that. Based on the success of that study, and it was a huge deal when it came out, it was on cover of magazines back when we used to have magazines and TV and stuff. It made a big splash. And based on that, now DARPA and in fact other similar agencies started pouring money into this. So during these past 17 years or so, the government has spent somewhere around $7.5 billion doing a broad set of research in this whole area of, can I measure, can I improve the performance of the brain with neuroscience technology? And hundreds of papers have been published, and the results are stunning from what in a laboratory. And so you see research showing you can make the brain go faster, and you can improve memory, and you can triple learning speed and have an impact on Alzheimer's disease. And now, as there's a very big gap between I did this in a lab and now I'm shipping a product that a regular consumer can use. But nonetheless, the science is just really extraordinary.
A lot of this data is coming in EEG format. Just curious about because there's volumes of data and the crunching of the data. And this is where I think AI will bridge into the conversation. It's just a lot of data to read the tea leaves on. And that took years of analysis, but to have real-time feedback and make actionable decisions, that's where I think this computational power and this AI becomes a lot more relevant in today's application. But I just want to make sure it's EEG.
No, that's exactly right. So first of all, for those of you listening, my guess is most of your listeners know this, but EEG stands for electroencephalography. It's basically the electrical signals that come out from your brain through your skull. And it's a bunch of squiggles. In fact, Pedram, as you say, there's something like from a normal EEG, 200 million data points per hour that are coming out from the brain. And so it is too much data for a human brain to process, but that is child's play for AI. And so exactly as you say, AI has transformed things. I think EEG was probably the most predominant source of the data, but they collected everything. And so you saw a lot of fMRI, you saw stuff with FNIR, near infrared spectroscopy. And then they were looking at heart tracings and they were looking at galvanic skin response and eye movement and pupillometry. And that's just a lot of data. You got to understand over these 17 years, there were hundreds of research studies, billions of dollars spent, and it's kind of all over the place. But when you look at the data, yeah, probably just by volume, EEG is the largest one. And you can get a lot more information from EEG than you can, say, from a heart tracing or from an FNIR, just because it's got more temporal specificity and more ability to kind of make sense of the landscape.
So this data starts coming out. We start to see the ability to positively impact. You're taking a novice to 80% marksman in what, like 2 weeks, you said, something ridiculous. Yeah. And then, so that application obviously makes sense for training the military. Where else did it start to cross over? Where else did we see that we were able to build gains for people in society?
Well, I think the first thing I'd say is up until maybe a couple years ago, all of this was really done in a laboratory setting. And I just want to emphasize there were really incredible findings, but all of them were scientific discoveries rather than it's actually having an impact in the world. But thinking probably, and this may not be right, but I think something like 80% of it was military and probably 20% of it was stuff that would be commercial. So there was definitely a lot of research in sports. And there was preliminary research showing that you could improve people at archery and golf using the same kind of neurofeedback. There was some incredible research that came out in learning. And so DARPA did a great set of studies where they said, can we teach people to learn to speak languages faster? And basically, the way it worked is they built a very primitive AI system, which was creating language learning content. And then as people were gathering that information as a learner, the system was monitoring the brain and paying attention to their attention, their engagement, their cognitive workload. And it used those metrics in the brain to modulate the information coming at the person, what's called closed loop system. And they showed a 250% improvement in learning speed and retention, right? Which is just, right, it's staggering. And of course, just like all this other stuff, it just sat in a lab and nobody did anything with it. But there were a number of use cases where it came out. There were also some where it was really powerful, but probably not so helpful to society. And so another thing that they showed was you could use it for what's called neuromarketing. You could put an ad in front of somebody, you could look at their brain and figure out the efficacy of the ad. And actually, for a while now, every Super Bowl ad has gone through this kind of neuromarketing analysis because you can assess how effective is this at getting somebody to buy something. And as you may know, Meta has done a ton of work in using that to optimize their algorithms, which I think most of us would agree is really impressive scientifically, but probably a detriment to the kind of to humanity, right?
Building a Death Star. Yeah. All that said, the flip side of this is, stay on the same metaphor, the Jedi training. Like, how can I leverage this type of technology? And people are so afraid of AI. AI is here to stay. It's not going anywhere. But using AI to enhance my analog capacities to enhance my biological being in a way that makes me more impressive of a life form. That's really interesting. And that, I think, is the future that you're starting to carve into with some of the work that you're doing. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about how this can now be used to help human brains and help human cognition.
First of all, what you're articulating is exactly what I'm devoting my life to and what our company is devoting its life to. At a conceptual level, we know that neurofeedback, if it's used right, works. Right? We know if you give people information about are they in the zone or not, and you do it right, they can get into the zone more easily and they can improve their performance. And that's just one thing. But we know that having these metrics about your cognitive state can be useful. And so AI now can do two things which change the situation. The first is, as you pointed out, what AI allows us to do is analyze this neurophysiological data much better than we could have done before. And in fact, in the neuroscience world, there's been a revolution in the last 5 years, all because of AI and machine learning technology, because now we can take these 100 million data points per hour and we can analyze it. And so what my company and those of us working with this can read in the brain with EEG doesn't even begin to compare to what we could have done 5 years ago. We can now figure out what's happening in the brain with almost millimeter level precision. And you can start to say, okay, while you're golfing and make a shot, you cut something and it goes in versus you miss it. This is what we're seeing in the brain. You can correlate that with what's happening in the eyes and biomechanics. You can aggregate it and start to develop extraordinarily powerful metrics. But the other thing you can now do is you can take that information, those metrics, you can feed them into AI and have the AI become a teacher to the person. And so it's a whole different world than the DARPA experiment. But in essence, if you kind of think about a broad system here, imagine that as you're going through your day, using sensors that are completely unobtrusive, you're collecting all this raw data. AI is analyzing and it's evaluating moment by moment. Are you in a happy place? Are you in a place where you function at your best? And it's not only looking at that, but it's looking at all of what we call context. What are you doing? Are you doing well? Are you doing poorly? And it's correlating that, and it's starting to say, hey, Pedram, when you're really at your best, this is what it looks like. Oh, and by the way, in order to do that, this is what the lighting looks like. This is what your sleep was like yesterday. This is what your diet was like. And it forms those insights. That information now goes into the AI and it can become a coach to you to say, hey, let's work together as a partnership to figure out how can we help you get to your best. That's in essence the vision we are building toward in my company, what's called AI neuro performance. And there's a lot of kind of academic theory underlying it. Just one of the ideas, and some of this is in science fiction, and I'll talk about that in a second. But from an academic perspective, I think the first paper I know about was in 1960. There was a psychologist named J.C.R. Licklider who published a paper called Man-Machine Symbiosis, based on biology of seeing what happens when you can actually combine different species to get something that neither species can do on their own. What I think we're ideally moving toward in a way that will help people is a way that you and AI can become partners, where the AI can now, by having an awareness of what you're doing, having an awareness of your state, and knowing how to interact with you, effectively become a coach to you moment by moment to get you to function at your best and at your happiest.
How does the technology deploy? I'm wearing an Aura Ring and a Whoop. And yeah, I check the data every once in a while, but I don't have an AI. Maybe I should be wearing the Meta glasses so it could measure the food I'm eating so I don't have to go report all this stupid stuff, right? But these kind of disparate towers of data I look at and I'll kind of cross-reference, but there is no kind of binding AI intelligence saying, hey, dummy, you ate the cheesecake after you had the binge watching on your TikTok and you got out of the zone. So your bad food decisions are coming after bad media decisions.
You're describing my evening from yesterday. How did you know that? I guess
That's exactly it.
qigong training has just taught you to be psychic here.
The gift of foresight, but it's coming together, right? So now, does it have an EEG wand on the head? Like, where are you grabbing the data? What part of the data ecosystem is being added here, or is it the HRVs and the stuff that we're grabbing already with AI?
It's an excellent and important question. There are two parts to the answer. The first one is exactly as you say, for our technology to be effective, what we're going to need to do is aggregate all that data into a single platform. And that is where the AI world is going. You may have heard of OpenClaw, which is one of the most exciting AI product releases pretty much ever. And what OpenClaw does, and now you're seeing this everywhere in the landscape, is it does create a kind of an integrated platform for assembling it. And what we know is when you take an AI model and you train it with what's called multimodal data, where simultaneously you know the HRV and you know the brain data and you know what's happening in the context and so on, now that model becomes a lot smarter than what you with Claude. And in fact, that insight is going to cause AI 2 years from now to be almost unrecognizably more powerful than it is today. But the other question you ask, which is really important, is where do we get the sensor data? And the answer is because there's so much interest in this, you're going to see these sensor data get collected in ways that are effectively invisible. Now, if you want to get brain data, you're going to have something on your head. So you and I are not wearing anything, but there's a lot of people around who wear headphones. There's a lot of people who have little things in their ears to talk with. You can, at this point, generate EEG in a way where it's essentially seamless, where it's not that different than the Whoop and the Oura Ring that you wear. And I think what you're going to find is that people will be, when they wear a baseball cap, they'll have EEG sensors in them. And the like, certainly your Oura Ring, certainly your Whoop. By the way, the data streams now can go into OpenClaw, they can go into our platform. So those are easily accessible. The meta glasses and sort of figuring out what you're eating and what you're doing, what's going to wind up happening is those sensors are just going to almost invisibly start getting integrated into our environment. And what we can do with a camera that's on a laptop today is radically different than what we could have done a year ago. And so for us, as we build a product, we need to do two things. First, we need to figure out a way to seamlessly integrate with people's natural environment. You won't use this unless you can just push a button and now all of a sudden we're getting the Oura Ring and we're getting the Whoop data. But we also need to give you a motivation to say, you know what? I care enough about the data that's coming out from my brain, even though kind of my brand is I've got my bald head here and this is my look. Maybe I'm going to be putting this on because it's so cool. And so that's where it's going. But I do think a lot of people do wear things on their heads where it'll be very easy to put sensors. And the truth is, the younger you are, the more likely you are to do that. The main form factor we use is headphones. So because of the fact that there's so many people who wear them and you can get great EEG coverage from the sort of the top part of the head. And so it's a perfect setup in terms of the sensors.
Is that a device that you have manufactured, like proprietary device, or are you working with some device that you like in the market?
We're working with a device we like. We as a company are not going into the hardware business. We've made a strategic decision, for better or for worse, that we believe the market is going to create a lot of different sensors. And we want to figure out how to work with all of those rather than saying we're going to build our own. And I think that is happening. I think I really do think you're going to get to someone like you would be a power user because you're so interested in optimizing your own body. So I imagine if our product is good enough, you're going to say, you know what, screw it. I'll wear some headphones for a half hour. Let me see what it does for me.
Well, the juice has to be worth the squeeze, right? And so for me, if I'm wearing the Whoop and I go for a hike and then it's like, hey, was this a hike or a run? You just, push one thing and you're done. You're like, all right, that was fine. But if it's like, hey, here's 20 questions I need you to answer every day, it's get in line, dude. And so the amount of practicality and the payload for what you get out of it, currently, I could tell you if I had a bad night's sleep, I don't need any of these stupid things, right? I'll wake up and be tired. And so once the data becomes more relevant to like when I should make my better decisions, when I should write, when I should be creative, when I should turn off everything and just be with the family, those things become significant in how I would deploy my time best in life.
Exactly. When I started the company for about a year and a half, I was partnered with a DARPA program manager who had done a lot of this neuroscience, named Amy Cruz, who is this being of light who you meet her and you've been trained to her energy like a guru, and then you leave and then where'd you go? She's just this unbelievable force of nature. And she used to, this was a while ago, right? But she used to make the point that there were pedometers 20 years ago that could track your number of steps and nobody used them. And until Fitbit came along and created a form factor that was really engaging, a user experience that was really engaging and enough value, no one bought it. And then when they hit that kind of inflection point, then everybody did it. And so now everybody's tracking their steps, but it was this kind of perfect mix of a number of things coming together around the form factor and the coolness, the user experience, and the value of the data. The other thing, which you didn't mention, but which is also really important, is the data has to be accurate and useful. So I think the other thing which both Whoop and Fitbit have done, I mean, clearly their data is still not perfect, right? We all know if you wear 3 sleep trackers, they're going to give you radically different data. So there's no ground truth. But it's good enough that you pay attention to it, even though you know there's probably a 2/3 chance it's right. That 2/3 chance, given that it's looking really cool and they've sort of created great user interface and it's super easy to use and super easy to recharge, that's caused those 2 companies to become juggernauts, which have really positively changed the world. And I would say, again, what you are experiencing today is unrecognizable from what you'll have 2 years from now. Because 2 years from now, systems are going to aggregate all the data and the value you're going to get is going to be 100 times what it is today. And you're going to see, and frankly, those guys are either going to be part of the solution or they're just going to wind up becoming sensors to someone's larger integrated picture.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. This lady, out of curiosity, was she a bright light before she got into this work? Like, did she come in a bright light? Because there's a lot of people I know that started messing with this technology, doing gamma wave coherence, and this is 40 years of Zen, and just, oh crap, this actually woke a human up, right? So there are some spiritual implications to opening parts of our consciousness up that this work I have seen has flirted with as well.
Well, let me say, I don't want to spend any more time talking about Amy because she's a unique being and I only know her when I know her. And I suspect a lot of what she is, she was just born like that. I think there is very good reason to be optimistic that this type of technology can be helpful to the spiritual journey. And there are, like you say, 2 ways that theoretically it could be helpful. The first is just the zone for a sniper is something you can measure and give feedback about. There's reason to believe that there are neurophysiological correlates of enlightenment or samadhi or whatever you want to call it, whatever you want to say is at the end of the spiritual path where you become one with God, right? It just would make sense that you've got metrics you can pull out of the brain and body that are associated with when you are in a state of oneness. And to the extent that's true, there should be a way of giving people that information. Almost you sit down for a meditation session, and at the end you get feedback, or maybe you even get feedback during it. Maybe you're sitting down and you're just kind of trying to pay attention to your breath, and the system notices when your mind wanders and it gives you a nudge. And maybe instead of taking 20 years to get enlightened, now maybe you can get there in 12 or something, right? The other way, which I think I'm maybe a little less excited about than some of the other guests who've been on your podcast, is, let's call it neuromodulation, where you're doing something to the brain to induce a state of elevated consciousness. Now, clearly there are things that work, and these psychedelics, there's no doubt they can accelerate that journey. They will do it. There's a lot of people playing with the idea of, let me turn off this part of the brain or turn on that part of the brain, or make your brain entrain with this frequency. And so I'm going to shine light in here, or turn off the posterior cingulate cortex or whatever. And now all of a sudden I'm going to induce it and teach your brain to become enlightened faster. There's a lot of people hawking products. I've tried them. They haven't worked for me. I've definitely spoken to people who believe it. Like I've definitely spoken to people who have used products and they are utterly convinced that they've gotten them. My guess is ultimately we'll get there. When I have looked at the science, I've tried them out as a customer, but when I've actually looked at the science, I fear that the marketing promises are a little bit over people's skis in terms of what they can actually deliver. It's an incredibly beautiful idea. Like, I'd love to push a button and become enlightened. And I think everybody would.
I'd also like to have a six-pack tomorrow. Everyone would. It's the same type of promises that these guys are making, these shortcut hackers. And I have seen a lot of dangerous signal in that space. It's a lot of marketing. It's a lot of hyperbole. And I've met these guys, and they're not independently enlightened. They're just using gadgets and very proud of themselves. But when you see somebody who's enlightened, like the lady that you were alluding to, I have a Zen master who will walk into a room, and I don't care who you are, you turn around and you say, who's that guy? It is so apparent. There is nothing to doubt when you see this person. There's just this glowing baby face that like has a saint-like glow. You're like, what? Who is that guy? That's a guy who's done the work, right? And a lot of these hackers that I've seen do all these gadgets and do all this stuff and pop all the pills and do all the peptides and are on ketamine as we're speaking. And they claim to visit these places, but they don't actually live there, right? And so I emphatically want to make sure the audience hears that I agree with you on that. Is there's a lot of shortcut crap out there.
Yeah. And I hope that what I'm communicating, and I think what we're agreed on, is there's reason to be optimistic that there are bona fide shortcuts, but it's going to take a lot of work and research. And my hope would be to get enlightened in 12 years instead of 20, not 40 years of Zen in a 3-day, $15,000 neurofeedback session, right? I think that's the theory. But I'm going to go back into learning theory about this because I'm hoping it's actually relevant to your audience. I know that what I'm going to say, you know extremely well. Allow me to go on a bit of a tangent. I promise I'll come back to enlightenment here. One of my dear friends, he's passed away now, was a professor at the University of Florida named Anders Ericsson. And Anders spent his entire life studying masters in a broad array of arenas. And he looked at golfers and he looked at violinists. And his entire body of work was, how did they get there? What does it take for someone to really be the world's best violinist, the world's best golfer? And the kind of core discovery that he made, which matched a quote from Vince Lombardi, is practice doesn't make perfect, perfect practice makes perfect. And that one of the characteristics of these experts was how they trained themselves made a huge difference. And the 10,000 hours rule was sort of attributed to him by Malcolm Gladwell. I think what happened when Malcolm Gladwell wrote it up is it got oversimplified. The kind of key observation was, yeah, you got to do a lot of practice, but you have to practice correctly. And what we know in the neuroscience world is, especially when you're a grown-up, if you don't practice right, your brain doesn't rewire. So you can sit and meditate and not really learn much if you're not working. If you don't put your brain into a state where it's going to be plastic and rewire itself, what happens is you don't accelerate as quickly. And so what made the difference between a great violinist and a mediocre violinist was just the way they practiced was what Andrews called deliberate practice. And from a neuroscience perspective, that way of practicing where you're really present and paying attention, giving yourself feedback and becoming aware is associated with a state in the brain which becomes plastic, which allows you to rewire faster, right? Super long tangent. Now let's go back to meditation. And obviously, becoming a Zen master, there are many paths that have been proven to get there. And so only one of them is sitting on a meditation cushion for 20 years. But that's one of the paths, right? What I can tell you, having, like you, spent a whole lot of time in a whole lot of meditation sessions, is there's people who meditate better than others. I mean, it's just the case. To be a Zen master, you really do need to work hard when you're meditating to get your brain to rewire to the point where that samadhi becomes your natural state. And the prayer here with this type of tech, from a spiritual perspective, is that it's going to help that. It's going to help you know when you're in that kind of right learning state. It'll help you give the feedback so that every meditation session is a bit more efficient at actually rewiring your brain to get to the point where, yeah, you walk into a room, you glow, and everybody is entrained to your energy. That's the prayer. And I think you have a bunch of monks who follow you. I actually have a bunch of monks who follow me. And I think it's because people who are like serious in the spiritual world actually are intrigued about the idea of, can you give me something to help me kind of do this better?
It's built into the classics, the foundational work of my lineage, and every lineage has a work that does it. It's called The Secret of the Golden Flower, where you learn to see the light and hear the silence, and you fold your attention inward and you observe and you polish the mirror. It's work. And as your monkey mind chatters, you come back to the work, but it's a calibration, and it is a dedicated effort to really keep bringing yourself back to this mindset until you entrain and say, oh yeah, this is it, this is it. And so they've been doing this for a long time. I had a Zen master. We'd be sitting there feeling good about ourselves after a couple of days, and then they'd dump horse manure in the middle of the courtyard and then try to meditate with flies landing on your face, right? That's also a form of biofeedback, right? Is this working or not? How good are you? So I think the accelerated learning without actually getting there and having a path to get there faster is intriguing, right? Not cheating, but just becoming more efficient. Now that's okay. So I have obviously a lot of listeners that want to be enlightened, but I also have a lot of listeners who want to be better lawyers. They want to be better dads. They want to be better, whatever, teachers. And so how do we now take this into a practical application to make my ability to roll through my day better for folks that have different KPIs?
Yeah, let's build on what we're talking about. I feel like you've done a really good job of just drawing me to exactly the point where what I'm about to do is impart this wisdom that I think you just drew me right into saying. But nonetheless, it's important wisdom. Going back to Anders, when you take a look at the nature of deliberate practice, the most important thing in deliberate practice is consciousness and awareness of how things are working or not. And so when you were talking about meditation and the lineage you come from, what you said is, okay, I'm going to sometimes be there and sometimes the mirror is polished and sometimes it's not, but you're noticing, right? You're like, oh, I was there. As it turns out, if you're not paying attention to it, your brain's not plastic. And by the way, if you notice it and you're like, I'm there, that moment actually releases dopamine in the brain. But that sort of, I'm trying to get there, and then you suddenly notice that you're going to get a dopamine hit. And Why does that matter? It's not because it makes you feel good. It's actually because the dopamine starts closing the loop around neuroplasticity. When you're conscious and when you're aware, am I there? Am I not there? That releases acetylcholine in the brain. It creates plasticity. When you get there and then you say, hey, I'm there, and you give yourself positive feedback, releases dopamine, and it tells the brain, hey, this is a neural pathway. I want to keep building it. That's why in sports, somebody makes a touchdown, they kind of pump their hand because they're trying to induce dopamine to say, whatever you just did, I want to do this again. Right?
That was it. That was it.
That was it. Right. Yeah. Whatever the hell you did just now, do this again in next week's game. So let's talk about your lawyer who wants to be a better lawyer. Most of us go through our days in a dreamlike state most of the time. We're effectively operating on patterns that are wired into our brain that we're just reproducing over and over and over, right? That's why you keep getting into a relationship with the same person over and over. That's why you keep having problems with your coworkers in exactly the same way. If you want to change, building on the theme that you need to do the hard work, there is no magic pill, let's talk about those two things that Andrews did and how it impacts the lawyer. Number one, you want to start paying attention with consciousness to patterns, almost as if you're observing them from afar. You have a relationship that you've been duplicating. If you can sort of slow it down and notice, oh, look, this person said that, my chest tightened, and now all of a sudden I turned red. What's going on? Oh, yeah, this happened to me when I was 4 and my dad did this to me, but you slow the pattern down. That moment actually puts the brain into a plastic state, into a state where you can learn. And then maybe for 1 second, you respond differently. You say, hey, look, that actually worked differently. And you get a different response. And you say, hey, that was interesting. That iterative process over and over, tens of thousands of times, is the only way I think you can realistically rewire your brain. It is essentially going at life with deliberate practice. And the great thing about it is it's simultaneously bringing you slowly toward enlightenment, because a central component of enlightenment, and if you get just this, you get enlightened, is if you're actually present in the moment and not anywhere else, then, poof, you're actually living in a state of enlightenment. So I think the idea of simply trying to pay attention to things and observing your patterns will induce changes. And I think if you go into the literature in deliberate practice, if you go into the literature in therapy, if you go into the neuroscience literature, if you go into the meditative world, it's all the same kind of thing, that it all comes down to being present and trying to just see things that by slowing down you might not have otherwise seen.
As we are rounding into saying, okay, we've understood this for a minute. And so you could go to cognitive behavior therapy. You could go do a lot of things to, accelerate this loop. And now we opened the conversation by saying, hey, there's this thing called AI, which can radically, dramatically change the timelines on this and tighten these loops into these micro loops that are happening at faster iterations and helping us evolve into this faster. What does this technology do? Because, there's all this stuff, and then there's like, oh, I have a gadget or I have an app. And so how are you working to bridge the gap into this thesis, which is profound and like beautiful? And I thank you for doing this work. And now you have this chasm of saying now the technology has to be able to deploy this and we have to get there. Right? How do we get there? And I know you've made great strides, but so explain what the actual app does and how AI neuro performance is going to be the future of this.
The first thing I guess I want to make sure you know is we haven't shipped a product yet. We think we're going to be shipping a kind of beta product in a couple months. Those are famous last words from many technology companies. And what I've generally found is when you get 99% of the way toward a product release, that's usually about a third of the time. And the next 2/3 of the time is the last 1%. We're on that last 1%, and I just don't quite know how it's going to go. We have a bunch of visions for what we think this can do. And until it hits reality and people start using it, where all we can do is pray. You know that famous line, everybody has a plan and then they get punched in the face, right?
Mike Tyson.
The Mike Tyson quote. So the problem, everybody you talk to about this is like, oh my God, this is really cool. I want to use it. And when we are playing with it, it feels really cool. What I would say is we need to create a user experience where people say, this is easy, this is really cool, and it's helping me get better. And until we get those three things done, we'll have a product that nobody will buy. And I will share, we're not planning on making this a consumer app. We're going to be building it for university sports programs, and we're doing a lot of stuff in the military for FAA and Army kind of applications. But my hope is a year from now, you'll be using this because you think it's cool. And its components are what we've already discussed. First of all, it needs to aggregate data from a multitude of sources in a way where it becomes interesting. And so I'll talk about three of those sources. The first is we need to figure out a way to seamlessly label your environment and your day. What are you eating? What are you doing? And you actually, if to the extent that you're on a computer, that's very easy to do with a technology called VLM. So now what we can do is we can have the computer figure out, what are you doing? Are you distracted? Are you not? Are you doing a good job or not? We can moment by moment rank your activity, rank its nature. That's one thing. The second source of data is all of the historical data, and that's coming in from whatever data sources we can get. And so we'll pull it from your Whoop, we'll pull it from your Oura Ring, we'll pull it from wherever we can. But we're also going to have a camera on the laptop. We're going to know about the lighting. We're going to know about the temperature in the room. And then finally, we'll get sensor data, know your physiology. And we've got this massive database we've acquired from DARPA, where we will be able to generate metrics in your brain that you can't get anywhere else. So we will know in a way that nobody else can, are you focused? Are you paying attention? What's your cognitive workload? Are you in a flow state or not? And then, of course, as we get data, the system trains, gets better. We combine all of that. And now what it's going to do is start to generate insights and feedback to you to help you be better. And it's going to say, you went to, I want to know what time of day I should be doing that. And my hope is that a year from now, you're going to say, oh my God, I thought that was cool, but the computer figured out that when I change the lighting in my room, my cognitive function changes. And that if I do this with my lighting or that, or what if I change the color of my light, or what if I change the temperature in the room, or what if 3 minutes before I record a podcast, I go and I get some sunlight, look at what it does statistically. Once it starts to develop those insights and then gives you feedback, the hope is you will start using it the way that people use Claude, where you're going to be like, you just want it to tell you what you should be doing and work with it as a coach to optimize. And you're going to start to say, I mean, you're a very, very skilled person in terms of training yourself, clearly. Like you've developed a way of thinking about how to, I'm sure you design a system about when am I going to meditate? How am I going to meditate? What kind of Qigong practice am I going to do today? Right. And how am I, and for anyone like you're not following a regimen. You're developing it based on a deep insight about where you are and say, oh, you know what? Right now my hips are sore. I got to open them up. I was gonna do this thing, but now I'm going to do hip openers, right? I'm assuming, looking at you do that kind of thing. I want to get to the point where you go to the system and say, I'm thinking of doing hip openers today. What do you think? And the system says, Pedram, you really should go for a run. And I've seen this behavior in you before.
You slept enough, you had this many calories, and this is an excuse. Get going.
Exactly. But it's not going to be stupid. It's going to do it because it's observed you and it's observed other people. And this is what I want you to do, right? And it's going to be like, giving you feedback moment by moment. Hey, look, you're not in the zone right now. Try this. Take a breath. Or maybe you shouldn't be doing this. But effectively, it becomes like your coach. That's the plan. Like, I don't know if we're going to be able to do it, but that's the vision. I don't think it's an unrealistic one. And I think in today's technological world, what I'm describing, I am hoping is reality in under a year.
Yeah. It will very quickly learn my greatest hits. It's like Pedram does really well when he goes out in the sun. He doesn't really do that when he stretches in the middle of the day. So I'm going to recommend going out in the sun because the likelihood of that switching them is way better given this guy that I know.
Or here's a Qigong practice for bringing in sun energy into your system. You may not have known because it comes from a different school than yours, but try this movement pattern, see what you think.
Yeah, especially since you're on a flight right now. Yeah, because sometimes you can't get it. I think that's so cool. And I think that the promise of this, it's in the old days, there was a lot of hyperbole, and then Claude and GPT came out, and now everyone's vibe coding and everyone's AI is here to stay. Everyone now understands that this is markedly different. And the world has changed. And so this now turning to AI, and I'd love to see my microbiome data in there. I'd love to see my cortisol. I'd love to see my hormones. And as a physician, it's like there are also so many biological markers that are incredibly relevant. And if I could get more iterative on getting that data quicker, then I know that after every meal, my microbiome does this. That also is really powerful. And that's there. There's sensors in toilets now for the microbiome. We're getting there on all these fronts. And because you're device agnostic, what you're kind of trying to create is the glue to help with the intelligence that comes through all this.
And to be clear, it's not like David thought of this idea and nobody thought of this. OpenClaw, this is where AI is going, right? It has to. Otherwise, the problem with your Oura Ring is it's Oura Ring and it doesn't connect to everything. You will demand as a consumer something to glue it all together. And so Silicon Valley is responding. But that's exactly right. We're building this platform and I want to pull in the data from what's in your toilet. Exactly, because it'll make you better.
Yeah, it'll help me make better decisions.
I am so worried that particular phrase will get into the internet.
Here's the quotable.
This is the quote that's going to come out of this podcast from me.
David, this has been such a pleasure. We're out of time. Keep me in the loop on what you're doing. I'm fascinated. Let me know when you have a device for a guy like me to check out, because I'm always looking for edge, not to cut corners, but to get edge in a way that makes sense for me. I'm a dedicated, trained guy, but in Kung Fu, that block is the same block every time. So the more I can focus and not nail that block, the better I get at Kung Fu. And so being present is how I learn that block. Being aware is how I learn that block. I'll put the links and everything in the bio, but tell people how to find you and follow your work, please.
We're really absolutely terrible on social media. We don't have much. My URL is optios.ai. We have a LinkedIn page, but we don't have a newsletter and we don't do a lot of social media, but I wish I did. And maybe that's something we can develop. So the next time I get to talk to you, I'll be able to promote from our thing.
Now, why don't you stay focused on what you're doing? It's way more important than social media. I'm not a fan of social media. I love the work that you're doing. What a pleasure. Keep me in the loop. When you're ready to talk about the next iteration, come back on the show.
Thank you so much. Okay. It was a pleasure.